So what is neem oil? Neem oil is used all sorts of different places. Like you might see it come up as an ingredient in toothpaste, hand soaps, hand creams, or whatever cosmetics you might find in the beauty section of your pharmacy store. But for this video, we're going to talk about neem oil in terms of how you're going to be using it for your plants. When you're talking about neem oil in the context of plants, usually neem oil is talked about as a pesticide. It's something that you use to prevent pests from eating up your plants and causing all sorts of trouble that you don't want to deal with. So how exactly does neem oil work? The main ingredient that goes into neem oil is called azadirachtin. And this is something that comes from a type of plant actually that's from India. It's called Azadirachta indica. People have been using the neem tree leaves for hundreds of years as a type of herb for healing and also treating skin irritants. So knowing that neem oil is used as a treatment or sometimes being added into toothpaste and healing creams and things like that might give you a little bit of relief to know that neem oil is actually not toxic. That's not to say that it's zero toxicity, but it does mean that for most people, for most applications, at least for indoor plants or landscapes, neem oil isn't really going to cause any problems with being toxic to you or the wildlife in your area, or even your pets. So I know that the Environmental Protection Agency lists it as an irritant, but I think that's mostly for when it's being used in agricultural contexts, like you're getting gallons of water mixing up with neem oil and spraying it across acres of crops. In that case, there's a chance it could be a skin irritant and might potentially cause problems with runoff, but I think for most people, neem oil is probably not going to cause an issue for you unless you're like directly taking the bottle of neem oil concentrate and drinking it or something is probably not going to cause you any problems, as long as you're using it properly. So how neem oil works as a pesticide is it actually disrupts the insects' feeding and growth cycles. The azadirachtin component messes with their hormones and causes them to not want to feed anymore, and it also interrupts their growth cycles. Like they won't transform from larvae into their adult forms, and they'll also have a harder time laying eggs and reproducing. The nice thing about neem oil, it mainly affects leaf-sucking and leaf-chewing type of insects, the type of insects that you don't want to have around your plants. They don't really affect beneficial insects, and they don't harm any wildlife or any little animals that might come across your plants or even your pets. And that's kind of why I see neem oil recommended so much. It's completely all natural. It's not a pesticide that was made up in a lab synthetically that would kill off all sorts of different wildlife and disrupt the ecosystem. Neem oil is also pretty common. It's not like it's some kind of rare secret ingredient that you can only find in some obscure blog website or anything like that. But it's actually pretty common. You can go into like Home Depot and you can go into the pesticide section and you'll probably see it there. I've also seen it in a lot of gardening stores that I've been to. A lot of gardening stores have a pesticide section that you can get some stuff to treat your plants. So it's pretty easy to find. You can also get it online. And there's probably good reason for that. Neem oil is pretty effective, and I think a lot of people can attest to that. Neem oil is also good as a fungicide. It prevents any fungus disease from growing on your plants. And all around, it's just a nice thing that you want to add to your plant as part of your watering routine. So neem oil is great, but now let's talk about when you're actually supposed to use it. So as you can imagine, it's not something that you want to apply to your plant every day or anything like that. But to kind of get an idea of how often you should use it, you can kind of think about the half-life of the main component azadirachtin in the neem oil. And that'll give you a clue as to how often you should be applying it to your plants. So azadirachtin has something called a half-life, and essentially what that means is when this amount of time, this half-life amount of time passes, then half of the ingredient is going to be gone, just disappeared, degraded, consumed, decomposed, whatever. But basically half of it is going to be remaining after that amount of time. And the reason that neem oil has a half-life is because microbes and light will actually break down that azadirachtin component over time. And so what that means for you is that you're going to have to replenish it, reapply it every so often, just to replace that neem oil that gets broken down over time. So the half-life for azadirachtin in soil ranges from between 3 and 44 days. Kind of depends on what conditions you have your plant in, if it's outdoors in bright sunlight, if it's indoors in the shade, and it also kind of depends on what's actually in the soil, what kind of microbes are in there. So it's kind of, there's no way to really know for sure what the half-life is unless you actually like go into a lab, take a sample, and measure it like that. But that's kind of just a rough ballpark of what you can expect for the half-life. So maybe around a month, a few weeks is when you should probably expect the neem oil to start losing its effectiveness. And on the plant leaves, if you apply neem oil on the plant leaves, the half-life is going to be just a even shorter amount of time, just like a few days, 1 to 3 days. So what I've seen recommended, and this is listed on the Environmental Protection Agency, kind of in agricultural context, so you could probably give or take a couple of weeks, but the EPA recommends reapplying neem oil every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks you want to make another solution of neem oil and reapply it on your plants. I feel like you could probably get away with going longer than that. If you think about it, plants can do well without neem oil. Like, it's not a requirement for neem oil to be applied on your plants, so you could probably get away with waiting a little bit longer than that, maybe once every 1 or 2 months to reapply the neem oil. And you can also kind of tailor it to when you expect your pests to start infesting your plants. Maybe you can time it, or if you start to notice that some of the plants in your garden or maybe in your house have been showing signs of pest infestations, that's when you might want to start thinking about applying neem oil. So you can kind of use it as a preventative measure when you think there's a high risk of infestation, or you can use it as something that is year-round protection, just reapply it every couple of weeks. So it's kind of up to you. In my opinion, you'll probably save more money waiting a little bit longer, and it's not always necessary to use neem oil, so I would say maybe once every few months is probably okay, and just using it when you need it. So let's talk a little bit about how you're supposed to use neem oil on your plants. So when you get neem oil, it's probably going to come in some kind of concentrated solution of neem oil. And it's this bottle. You don't want to pour this bottle of neem oil concentrate directly on your plants. That's going to be way too high for it, and it's definitely going to damage your plants. So what you want to do is you want to take a little bit of that neem oil concentrate and dilute it in a bunch of water. So what the EPA recommends, depending on how bad the infestation you're dealing with is, you want to range from a mixture of 1 to 50 to 1 to 100. So 1 part neem oil, 50 parts, or 100 part water. And this is with a 70% concentration. So you don't really have to memorize that number. Most neem oil products that you can buy that say it's good for plants will definitely, I'm like 100% sure it's going to list some instructions on there on how to use it. So if you get some neem oil, all you got to do is just check the instructions, see what it says to do, and follow those instructions, and that's pretty much how you use the neem oil. But most of the time, if you're getting neem oil, it's probably going to come in a concentrated solution, and you got to dilute it. But the instructions will tell you exactly how much to dilute it by. But generally speaking, if you're having a bigger problem with pests, then you might want to increase the concentration a little bit, so maybe 1 to 50 parts water. But if it's something that you're doing as a preventative measure, it's not really something that's a concern to you at the moment, then you can probably go a little bit on the less concentrated side and go with 1 to 100 ratio. But that's pretty much it in terms of how to use neem oil. It's pretty simple to use. All you gotta do is just get some from your local hardware store or gardening store, dilute it in some water, and apply it on your plants once every 1 or 2 months. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.